Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Creative Technology Podcast, the podcast where we explore the fascinating world of generative AI and the artists who create it. Today, Hilmar and I are delighted to have with us Kris Kashtanova, a renowned generative AI artist and a pioneer in the legal recognition of AI art creators. Kris is known for stunning and provocative artworks that challenge the boundaries of human and machine creativity, as well as for an ongoing legal quest to get legitimacy and protection for AI art creators in the face of copyright and patent laws. In this episode, we'll talk about Kris's artistic journey, the tools and techniques, the ethical and legal challenges, and the vision for the future of generative AI. Stay tuned for an insightful and inspiring conversation with Kris Kashtanova.
Welcome from me as well, Kris. Great to have you.
So let's kick things off. Kris, how did you get interested in generative AI art, and what are some of the tools and techniques you use to create your artwork?
I changed a lot of professions in my lifetime. I started as a software engineer. I was doing software engineering for almost 10 years. I got my master's degree in Moscow State University in 2007. It's been a long time. I did computer graphics. I was a backend developer. It was at the time when artificial intelligence wasn't really exciting. So I remember during my studies when I was doing my master's, there was a course called Artificial Intelligence. I remember the book was really thick and it was really boring. And I remember I learned everything. I passed an exam and I forgot every single thing. I don't remember a single word from that. For years, I haven't really looked into artificial intelligence, but I did change several professions. First, I became a journalist and I was a human rights journalist. I lived in Russia and I was reporting on human rights and how those human rights aren't always respected in the country. What I wrote about was very controversial. I had to leave. I left in 2011. I was lucky because I got enrolled into University of London. It was called City University of London to study journalism and to do my journalism degree. So I kind of completely switched from software engineering tech into arts, because journalism is considered arts. And I discovered photography while I was studying, and it completely changed my life. I was obsessed with photography and arts. I think the last few years of my degree, I was just trying to having a full-time job as a photographer and somehow pass my journalism course. Opened a tiny studio, started doing art, completely immersed myself into artistic expression, photographed mostly sports, yoga, dance, worked with a lot of creative people. Everything was going great until 2020.
The pandemic.
Yes, my photography business completely was destroyed. I couldn't travel, my clients couldn't come to see me, so I had to find other ways to pay my bills. And I decided to return back to my tech background. I started taking courses, and there are so many online courses on tech. Took computer science course, took a programming course to just refresh my skills. And then little by little, I got back into tech. But generative AI wasn't a big thing. There was DALL-E, and I was in a waiting list, and I never Some of my friends had an account and they were telling me, or maybe you can use it. And I was like, no, I want to try myself, and never got into DALL-E waiting list until they became public and launched. But in 2021, I started experimenting a lot with 3D tools like Blender and Cinema 4D and writing little stories about how isolated I felt during the pandemic. I lost a lot of close people during COVID. I was grieving, so I had to have an artistic expression. So half of my day I would study tech, half of my day I would create art and cry. It was fun. I was making one image in Cinema 4D. I would create a world, and then I would photograph myself, really tiny me somewhere at the back to just put myself into the scene, and I would write a story. So the main thing was a story. I was doing it for like 200 days. I'm very organized. I like having a routine. But my images, they were very repetitive in the way that it would be a wide shot of the world and tiny me somewhere in the middle. And at the time I thought, well, this is great, but what am I going to do with it? I have all of these images and they're all kind of same. So after a while, I kind of gave up on it. I switched into something else. I haven't even thought about it for entire year until I discovered generative AI. And I was like, oh wow, I can turn my story into a graphic novel. How cool is that? And this is where we are.
That's awesome. And I think the way you also rediscovered the artistic side, getting into sort of the status quo of tools like Blender, Cinema 4D, and then starting to dabble with DALL-E and of course Midjourney is amazing. And it's funny, I think you bring that structure that you have for yourself to your community as well, because the challenges that you put out every single day, I think your community looks forward to it and they want that structure too and some way to share and explore. So absolutely love that. Hilmar, we could even alternate the questions if you want. What are you thinking here?
With the way you spoke, Kris, I sense that you had an internal journey as an artist. You did it in a couple of different modalities. How do you describe sort of this abstract journey that an artist actually goes through in the process of making? Can it collapse down in just a few sentences?
My artistic journey, it comes from limitation. Limitation was always the theme and something that inspired me a lot. I was born in a tiny village in south of Russia. It's like a territory that was always a conflict zone, a little bit like Ukraine now. It used to be like that for many years, very close to the border to Chechnya, which you probably heard of. During my childhood, my family was very poor. My parents were very young, and my grandma was the one raising me. I remember that we didn't have stuff. I didn't have a lot of stuff, and my grandma tried to get me everything she could, even though she had very little resources, so I could make something. I remember how creative we would get with those materials. She would make bread out of things that isn't supposed to be bread, because she couldn't buy good stuff. It was a lot of scarcity. Shops were completely empty. People didn't have money. So from that, I remember how I always learned that if you don't have something, you just create it with whatever you have around yourself. So I feel like with the tools, the way I came onto Blender and Cinema 4D was actually quite interesting, because I was using Photoshop for quite a while. I was taking self-portraits because I didn't like the way I looked and I tried to accept myself. So I would use Photoshop a lot to add a bit of meaning. I would take a portrait of me and then I would turn it into like a cloud in my head or like flowers coming out of somewhere. One day I thought how cool it would be to make like a 3D environment, but I tried to do it in Photoshop and it took me 8 hours. I tried to make me holding this big crystal in the middle of New York and that it would reflect all the buildings. And I was doing that in Photoshop and it was quite challenging. And when I finished it, I felt so great. And then I posted it on social media. People loved this image, but someone said, "Oh, did you do it in Cinema 4D?" And I was like, "Oh, what's that?" I did it in Photoshop. And everyone was surprised because it's not something you would do in 2D program. And then it blew my mind. I opened Cinema 4D and I thought, whoa, this is incredible. You can do what I just did in like 5 minutes, probably, if you know how to use it. And then I started learning Cinema 4D and then I understood how expensive it was and that there is Blender, which is completely free with a great community. So I switched into Blender. That kind of feeling of using those tools, it wasn't like I just jumped into it. I tried to do it in a way that was quite limiting because Photoshop is very limited when it comes to 3D. And then when I started doing it in Blender, I noticed my own limitation. To know Blender well, you need to spend years learning it. And I was learning it every single day, but I realized that it will take me forever to get really, really good at it. When generative AI tools came, I thought that was great because I could make things that I couldn't do with Blender. But as soon as I started using generative AI tools, I also encountered limitation. In August 2023, 2022 when I started, it was quite limited. You couldn't do photorealistic, you couldn't train a model on your face, you couldn't use ControlNets, you couldn't pose models, you were very limited. So again, I was so inspired to make it work. So that's what I feel is happening. Like as soon as I feel something is difficult or like challenging, I want to cross that boundary and try to make it work.
I love that. Fast forward to today, right? Tools are far more advanced and you've got this sort of foundation. You know Photoshop, you know photography, and you know 3D tools, and you've clearly been playing with all the latest AI models. As of April 2023, what are some of the challenges and opportunities that you find working with AI as sort of this like creative partner and co-pilot?
I'll tell you something funny, and probably what I say now won't really age well. I know that in a couple of months, it's not going to be an issue. As soon as Adobe Firefly released the beta, I was thrilled because I looked at it, I liked the interface, but I also saw it was very limited. So I thought, okay, I need to make a comic book with this. It was so funny because you can't use reference images yet. That's why I'm saying that probably won't age well. They probably will add it. I hope they will. But I thought, how can I keep a consistent character through frames, not using a reference image? And then I figured it out. I noticed that you can't put a reference image in it unless you generate it. If you generate it, you can put it in. But then you have to keep it. If you lose it, that's it. Your consistent character is done. You will never be able to continue your story. That really inspired me, and I made a comic book and I was very happy about it. It's pretty much with every tool, there are some limitations. There is some limitation of control. People are still developing it. I use ControlNets all the time and I can see how still full body isn't very good. Faces would be not very detailed. It still does a lot compared to what we could do a year ago, but there are little things that I can see. It's almost like a dialogue between me and AI. It's like 50% is me, probably 70% is me. I think 50% me, 50% AI was back in August. Now it's a little bit like 70% is me, 30% is AI. I think that gap will change, and very soon it will be just 99% is human and just 1% of AI, like a very smart copilot.
Well, it's deep. And I'm curious now, how would you define originality and then evaluate also what the quality of the art is like? What does it mean, the originality, and how do you look at the quality of the art?
I think AI shows us that the only way to be original right now is to be 100% yourself. A lot of people don't know themselves too well, or they don't take time, or they are afraid of parts of themselves. I was that way. I used to be so ashamed of certain parts of me. For example, when I get really tired, normally I can control it, but when I am very tired, I'm quite dyslexic. My writing becomes like, I don't see that words change places or that letters change places. And for many years, where I come from, there is no such thing as dyslexia. So people were just, you have to pay attention, you have to do it. It was like a fault of my own. So I really trained myself to be very careful, to check 100 times, and I would still make mistakes and I would still not notice certain things. Right now, having that, I actually don't mind it as much. I use Grammarly to check my writing. I do try to genuinely write as well as I can, but I noticed that there is some kind of style in those mistakes. And sometimes I would write something. For example, I wrote something like, I was taking self-portraits for 7 years, and then people started messaging me and saying, oh, wow, this is so powerful what you said. And I was like, I didn't say anything powerful. And apparently, instead of years, I wrote tears. And they thought I was being poetic and powerful, but it wasn't. I mean, it was tears, but I didn't mean it. So sometimes times I started embracing those parts of myself. And I think each of us has parts that make ourselves ourselves. Sometimes we see those parts as flaws, or sometimes we see those parts as something we want to hide from people. But if we really, really get to know ourselves, and if we share those parts with others, it gives us this connection with others, and it makes our art, whichever tools we use. When I do my stories, no matter what tools I use, I tell my stories, I tell about my childhood, my expressions, something that touched me, and no one else has exactly the same experience. So it will be quite original, even if it's told using AI. Also, each of us make choices that are different. We like different things, and each of us is unique in such a way, and we do have things in common. But if you take every single parameter you have, your age, your background, your childhood, your upbringing, everything, it makes this almost like a universe as a human. And if you are able to just share it, it will be original, no matter what tools you use. It won't be a possibility to make it not original.
Stephen Johnson, in his book, Where Good Ideas Come From, said that originality and innovation can only thrive in a space where there are errors involved. And that's what you're describing to us here, that you're not crisply defined, you're fuzzily defined in what you believe in and your background. And there is something on the fringes that defines that shape just as much as those things that are crisp. I think that's what I'm hearing you say. And it's a really amazing concept. And maybe playing this a little bit further, when you're saying you apply this in the use of generative AI by way of selecting things, of maybe misspelling your prompts unintentionally, what do you say to somebody who admires you as much as we do? And what tips would you give that person to say, well, your persona is reflected in the general corpus of all artists, have lived beforehand because their work is embedded in here. What signals do you get from that? Say, this is a reflection of you against all the things others have made.
I'm not sure I understand the question right. I've heard the word tips. I think there are a few things as artists that I noticed in myself, and I also feel a lot of artists have it. There is a thing called imposter syndrome. So I don't have it anymore. I used to struggle with it a lot. Imposter syndrome is when you start doing something and maybe you are not confident in it yet, and you're experimenting, and you're afraid to upset other people. You're just afraid that whatever you create and share, someone will get upset, that it's a copy of someone's, or it's not good enough, you won't be accepted, or stuff like this. Or if someone hires you and you don't feel your worth, you can't tell how much you charge for those things because you think that you aren't good enough, you're a novice. You compare yourself with other artists, maybe if those artists have more followers on social media or something else. Those are all kind of signs of an imposter syndrome. I had it in photography. When I started doing photography, at first I was very confident in myself because I didn't really have people around me. I was just playing by myself. And then when I joined the community, that's when the imposter syndrome kicked. I'm really care about people, so I was afraid to upset people because I felt like no matter what I create, it's a repetition of someone's idea, even if I don't look at anything. But after years of doing art, I understood that we are humans, and that's the nature of our brains. We actually create quite similar stuff, to be very honest, because it's just how we are. If you write a book, it will contain love letters and some ideas, and everyone who created books before, there will be something in common. I feel like there will be people with similar ideas, even if you don't copy each other. We learn from each other. We are a little bit like AI in that sense. Everything we see, we learn from, and even when we don't copy someone, we still get inspiration. Like me speaking right now, my grandma told me how to speak. She taught me, and that's almost like me copying her speaking because she never spoke English, but the language and all of that. So I feel like the most important tip I can give is to try and become courageous and brave, and to be okay if you share something and by accident it's a copy, or by accident someone gets upset. Because what I found is it shall not hold anyone back, and if something terrible happens, you can always apologize, you can always say you didn't mean to do it, but kind of create despite of it. And if you have people in your life who aren't supportive, who don't understand your good intention, or maybe try to limit your time with these people and spend time with people who empower you, who believe in you. And if you don't have people like that yet, you definitely will meet such people if you join like AI community, because people are quite encouraging and supportive, and it is very difficult to do. It took me almost 35 years, I'm 37 now, to understand that sometimes people around us can really trigger that imposter syndrome, trigger us playing small. And of course, when it's, for example, it's a family, we can't really choose, but we can choose how much energy we give to certain people, to certain communities, and just become brave and share your creations and keep making stuff, not being afraid to make mistakes or to upset someone, because there'll always be people who will misunderstand. No matter how great you are, there will be people who will hate it. I had such strange experiences in past years. I volunteer a lot, and you would think that's a great thing, right? Someone volunteers with homeless people, someone volunteers in a soup kitchen. Even in that case, there were people who weren't happy about it. There were people who were judging it. There were people who had negative opinion on it. So after that, I realized whatever you do, if you do anything at all, or really nothing at all, there will be people who will judge, but there will also be people who understand and support and just believe in you. And I think AI community is really great right now, because there are a lot of people who support and who elevate and uplift and share and make podcasts and make stuff. So those are my tips.
That resonates deeply with me. Like the three things I heard from that is community as a cure for imposter syndrome. I think that's huge. Speak your truth to power. Ignore the haters, right? There's always going to be haters just for literally everything. That's why there's a beautiful term for it, nicely encapsulated in haters. The third thing, which I think is a good segue into our discussion about IP and copyright law, is we are all products of our influences, like the people that raised us, the media that we consume, the teachers that taught us things, the art that we consume ends up essentially shaping how we express ourselves using classical tools and, of course, AI tools. I got to ask you, Kris, what's your goal and motivation behind this legal quest to get legitimacy for AI art creators? And what are some of the obstacles and oppositions, the haters, if you will, that you're facing along the way?
So first, I would like to say that when you said that, I remembered this thing that I've heard many years ago. I think it was connected with Justin Bieber, and I was much younger. I don't know if he said that or someone said who liked Justin Bieber. Haters are just your fans in disguise.
That's deep.
Yeah, I think I was very, very young when I've heard that first time, and I thought that's great. I don't know if it's entirely true, but I want to believe that. I feel like where I come from is, as I mentioned to you about limitations. I'm very healthy right now. I actually have absolutely perfect health, but when I was growing up, I was very, very sick. I was in bed for like half a year, and I was sick quite a lot. I'm quite surprised that things went really up for me as I grew older, but I know what it is like to be very limited in your movement and things you can do. So for me, as soon as I discovered AI, I thought about how amazing it is for accessibility. I have few friends who are fighting cancer right now. They absolutely can't draw or take photos. They pretty much spend all their time between surgeries and between treatments. For them, them AI is an incredible tool. They are making stuff, they are creating, it makes them happy. So this is where the initial thought came from, that I thought, okay, you can do that with AI. But then I was thinking, okay, if this is not copyrightable, it means that people with disability can't really earn money doing it, and they are already limited to make money with a lot of things. So I thought, well, this is not right. It shall be copyrightable, because if you are bedridden and you can only use your voice, you can still create art, you can still write books, you can still make stuff. So it kind of limits people who already have limitations. And then that was my first thinking. Then I thought about how, when I was creating my first comic book using AI, I used a lot of creativity. And also, even though back in August, it was not a lot of way to control it. There were no ControlNets, no latent couple, no other tools. But you could still control it with prompts, and you could still direct it in a way that would be close to your vision, because it wasn't just like a slot machine. It gave me like 1,000 pictures and I assembled them. No, it took me a while to get right images and to direct AI to get those images. In the US copyright, when you copyright something, for that to have copyright first, it only has to be a human author. In the US, machines can't get copyright from the Copyright Office. There shall be only two things. First one, it shall show some kind of creativity. For example, a telephone book can't be copyrighted. A novel or a poem can. And the second thing, you have to be able to show that you had some kind of control over the result. It's actually a quite controversial thing in terms of control over the result, because I do feel like if you ever tried drawing with watercolors, there's not much control you have. I don't know, maybe I do it wrong, but I think I have more control with AI than with watercolors. Also, there are artists who just would splash the paint into the canvas. Also, not that much control, but all of that is copyrightable, unlike AI images. For me, when I applied for my first copyright, I felt those things were what happened. I did have creativity, I did have control with my prompts, so I felt that it was copyrightable. The Copyright Office decision was that the comic book as a whole is copyrightable, the arrangement in the story, but not individual images. The way they did it, they did not reject my copyright. They granted me a copyright. They just excluded images. In that case, a person can't really just appeal writing a letter. A person would have to go to court. I don't like the idea of going to court for multiple reasons. I thought that I will try another strategy, because it is true that the way I used AI back in August had less control than I have now. I thought I will create a completely entirely different body of work where I will show that control. I will show creativity and control, and I will educate the Copyright Office that such control is possible, that those images can be copyrighted. It's a completely new body of work. I submitted first image, which is called Rose Enigma, and it's based on my drawing. I drew a drawing and then I turned it into an AI art piece. My lawyers helped me describe the process. Speaking of lawyers, the community is truly amazing, because I wrote on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook that I need a pro bono lawyer to do this. I didn't want to pay. I work as a freelancer right now, so I was like, no, I can't really pay for expensive lawyers to do that. But a lot of lawyers reached out, and I chose lawyers who I felt were quite independent and who were interested in helping the community. They were very involved in writing that letter and understanding technology. They granted me pro bono, which is free because it's a case of public interest.
Do you get a sense of where the lawyers think this space is going to go, what their expectation is, whether we can overcome the current legal and the ethical issues that are associated at the moment?
I actually recommend you interviewing my lawyer, because she is incredible and she is is visiting on Wednesday because we are teaching a class at Columbia University. I will be teaching AI part and she'll be teaching copyright in tech part. So she would probably, not probably, 100%, she would answer this question way better than me. But I think lawyers, majority of them are just very curious about it because it's a new thing. It's like a revolution. There are so many cases that were copyrighted that have way less control and way less creativity than making something with AI. It doesn't make sense to a lot of lawyers why previous one was rejected, why those images were rejected. And one of the reasons is because they say that the way my previous lawyers, my former lawyers, tried to copyright it, they tried to copyright every iteration of AI. So basically you write a prompt and they wanted to copyright every image that came in between your prompt and the result. And to be very honest, because I'm not very familiar with law, and also I wasn't taking part in writing the first letter as much, I didn't quite understand that. That's what the Copyright Office said. They may have agreed if it was just the result, because usually that's what you get. That's the goal. And my current lawyer said that if that was what the letter would say, there was a high chance AI images would be copyrighted. But it's too late now, and now I have a new case and I will keep on it. I'm planning to submit several images that are done in a different way with different techniques and to explain to the Copyright Office what each technique involves, what control and what creativity. And I'm pretty sure that in a few months there will be clarity because we already got some guidelines from them. We just need those guidelines to be more clear.
Yeah, I think it's going to be exciting to see, especially that your new body of work uses Stable Diffusion and ControlNet and clearly far more expressive forms of control where the artist is clearly shaping the output of these diffusion models. I think will be exciting for the entire AIR community to see. So thank you.
In my next ones, I really want to use something like in painting and the photographs as an input. And then also I would like to show the Copyright Office how models are trained and what that entitles. Everything that is coming out now, I would love to show what's possible. I didn't have any kind of attachment to the tools I'm using. I thought that Stable Diffusion, pretty much every tool apart from Adobe Firefly. Adobe Firefly has a different model, but there is no way for me to try and copyright Adobe Firefly because they are not for commercial use. Also, NVIDIA has, they say they are training a model that is like a synthetic model trained on synthetic assets. At least those were rumors I've heard. But again, no one has seen it. I've never seen or tried it. So that's why I thought I will try with Stable Diffusion and I will try it like this. And maybe in future I will try again with just text to image thing, but with a different kind of argument why it is copyrightable. Because my goal is that everyone can use any tools they like and be able to copyright it.
On that note, I know you were excited about Firefly, right?
Way too excited.
Yeah, it's awesome because I think a lot of people are afraid to dabble with, say, Stable Diffusion or even Midjourney because like, well, I just don't know what it's trained on, or I know what it's trained on and it may potentially contain copyright material, whereas Adobe is at least trying to create a model that could have better provenance. So how do you think about sort of these considerations in your own art and also as you go do commercial work? Because you alluded to this in a post, like, you have clients coming to you that are far more excited about dabbling with AI now that they're like, hey, once Adobe turns the thumbs up on commercial use, it'll be exciting for you. So just talk a little bit about how you think about the varying tools and commercial work out there.
Past 6 months, I do AI full time. I worked for 2 startups. At first, I decided to have a full-time job and work at a startup. And I thought that will be so great because I will be able to get my paycheck every month and just do AI. I worked for one startup. I was doing AI research and I was doing a lot of Stable Diffusion stuff. Everything I was doing was pretty much like training models materials in Stable Diffusion, using in painting, like all of that stuff. And the company was making 3D environments, like rooms and stuff like that. And then second startup I worked for was for 4 months. I also did a lot of AI research. I did a lot of coming up with ideas, coming up with product. So I did try to be a product manager for a little bit, but then I realized that I'm way more into AI research. I worked there full time. And then, working at a startup, for me personally, I just noticed that I was a little bit slowed down in my research because it wasn't possible for me to explore more areas of AI. I just had to focus on my work at a startup and what was interesting for them. And also at the time, my social media started growing exponentially. It's still happening. It grows 2,000, 3,000 people a day. I started feeling like this is the time for me to focus on learning and to focus on connecting with people and to be kind of have freedom of working in different projects, because in that way, if I work for different clients, for different projects, I can learn a lot. I can use pretty much every AI technology because I will have variety. When you work at a startup, it's not possible to work for different clients or consult different people. Also, I teach a lot. I teach at school, I teach at university. I like teaching. I love making free tutorials on YouTube. And I could see that working at a startup, because it was a new startup, you had to work like 14 hours a day, sometimes including weekends. So I just felt like for me, I would rather be like a freelancer and an independent AI consultant and a mentor, something like this. I resigned and I didn't even announce I resigned. I just changed my bio on Twitter and I started getting clients approaching me. The first client was a big brand in London. They told me just last time I talked to them that as soon as they release this product, they are happy if I tell the community every step how I made it and everything about it, because they know I want to educate. I want people to be successful. And there is enough for everyone because there are so many brands, so many cities, so much. It's like, and now it's time to share and to learn. That's why I post about brands a lot. I really try to keep their privacy because they want to launch. They want to be the first one. I'm sharing things that I am allowed to share, but I'm very looking forward because it's a 4 weeks project. So I'm going to be able to share very soon. And then I have a lot of like small things like clients reaching out or people asking me to consult them. Tomorrow, I'm going to have actually a big day because here in New York, we have these big billboards at Times Square. They're like buildings with different things happening on them. And the person who I consulted is going to have a big photograph he did on one of those buildings. I did AI part of it. We are going to share how his process, what it involved, because he took a photo. He's a photographer. And then he asked me to outpaint it. And we were outpainting it, but he's so particular that it took us 8 hours because he needed every single flower to be in every single place. And honestly, I don't know. I'm very patient, but I didn't know if I can.
That's commercial art for you right there. But it's great to get your work seen by such a large audience out in the world. And just to summarize here, you're an artist, you're a teacher, you're also an activist to a large degree. We were both wondering, Bilal and I, you have the freedom to choose your next project. So we were wondering, where do you believe the space is going to develop? What kind of activism are you going to bring to it so that it is developing into a positive direction? Where is it going to go and what are you going to do to get it there?
Right now, community and education are two things that I'm most passionate about. Here in New York, I am gathering people one by one into a small community where we can see each other and have like real life walks in the park and learning from each other. So community. And on Twitter, because my Twitter is growing so fast, I am trying to have a community there. And I know that it's all over the world. build. But already people started taking my example and building communities around them, and I can see it. And sometimes people ask me to post like, oh, I live in this place in Virginia and there is no one here. Can you just ask your audience? Maybe there are some people. And I would ask, and there would be people around that area, and they form communities. So when communities are built, people can learn and people can educate and people can lean on each other, because it's still a very turbulent, a very controversial area. And I think, of course, I am more than anything, I am interested in this to be ethical, and it's not fun to be harassed on social media every single day, trust me. It's not fun to realize that all those people who are writing those negative comments, some of them are hurting. They're not writing it because they are evil. They're writing it a lot of times because they are scared to lose their job, or they feel like someone stole from them or someone threatened their career. So for me, just feeling it and knowing that what I do, I need to be responsible, because what I say and how I use these products is going to shape this technology. So I feel like my goal is to unite people. I don't know how yet in terms of uniting not just AI creators. There is no problem in uniting AI creators. They are very united. It's about how do we unite with artists who are opposed of AI? How do we find a way to coexist and to make sure that they don't feel hurt or threatened? So this is one of the thoughts I am thinking, and that's why I'm so excited about Adobe Firefly, because they at least tried to make it commercially safe, to honor artists, to ask the community for their opinion, because I was interviewed a couple of times by Adobe asking about how to make it better for everyone. And I think it's an ongoing process, and I feel like other companies will also follow. Stability AI also announced they are going to train Stable Diffusion 3.0 that is going to be like more commercially safe. It's the step forward, and we will have it. We will have it eventually.
Well, what you certainly share with other artists is your journey of becoming one, and the tools that you use are different. There is common ground and common value. If you had to speculate, if a topic this polarizing, where there are really strong opinions in both directions, is the regulatory framework going to step in, or will it continue to be hands-off?
There will definitely be some sort of regulation. Even with the copyright thing, having guidelines, it's already a regulation. And the Copyright Office also said that they're going to listen to artists, to listen to journalists in next couple of months to kind of clarify all that area. I can see politicians are starting being interested. So I do feel there will be some sort of regulation. I don't even say it because of generative AI. Actually, generative AI is probably the one of the most innocent areas of AI, but think about medicine and think about weapons and think about those areas which have way, way more serious implications. So those definitely will have regulations. I do believe we will have regulations some sort everywhere eventually.
Maybe it's time to come to some closing comments. And one from me is what you wrote on Twitter about our common value system as artists, as humans, and what we hold on to. I encourage our audience to go to Kris's work on Twitter, because I think it really deeply resounded with me. So thank you for writing that and being so honest, and you're true to what you're saying. You want to be 100% yourself, and I can feel that in the way you write.
Thank you.
And thank you again for building this awesome community. And the story you shared about people in Virginia hitting you up and like, hey, like I have nobody local. Where are my local homies to go like talk about, nerd out about AI?
They now have like 10 people in the same area. It's amazing.
So you're a super connector. Hats off to you for using that forum to do that. I've seen many creators, once they start experiencing meteoric growth, suddenly it becomes about monetization, and suddenly it just turns into a very commercial feed. And I think you managed to push on something that impacts the entirety of the AI art community, which is like, hey, these are tools I want to use to express myself. Can we please make it legitimate and acceptable to go make this happen, whether that's on the regulatory side, but also creating this good example for the anti-AI art movement as well. And I hope you do find a way to bring that community in and find this way to coexist, as you say. So I'm super excited for the work that you're doing. To wrap things up, any closing remarks that you'd like to leave the audience with? This is where you should absolutely plug your stuff as shamelessly as you'd like. Certainly our audience would also be people who are working in tech companies and media companies and so on and so forth. So any message you want to leave to them, now is the time, Kris.
Oh, no pressure. I think what I want to leave behind is that something that I wrote a few days ago, and I don't know if that's what Hilmar was referring to, but I think because I have background in software engineering, some people ask me, shall they get degree in computer science to do AI? And my answer is that you don't have to. You can, if that's what you're passionate about. If you're passionate about coding, I wasn't passionate about coding. That's why I'm not a developer anymore. Everything you already know is enough, actually. All you need to do is just ask GPT-4 or any other chat to tell you like an overview of an algorithm, so you at least understand what is going on in a simple language. Ask it to explain it to you as a 10-year-old. And then just experiment with tools and learn as much as you can about how to use tools and how to use them, how to apply them into area you are passionate about. I feel like what is happening right now is that it's definitely big change for society, and a lot of people are afraid, and a lot of people are even afraid to start and to try it. If each of us teaches just immediate circle around us, like your family, start with your family. You will be surprised how your grandparents will do really good with it. I do it with my grandpa, and he's 84 years old, and he's incredible because he has so many stories to tell, such imagination. Again, do it with young kids, do it with elderly people, do it with your aunt and uncle, and just teach them and show them what it is. And then kind of spread it to your friends, because I think all of us will have a head start if we know how to use it. It will secure jobs, because if you are, say, an illustrator, but you know how to use AI tools, you definitely have more security in your job than if you don't know how. Basically, each of us who is interested in AI, and I'm sure people who are listening to this podcast are people who are interested in AI, already have something they can teach. And also remember that majority of people of our planet never heard of AI yet. They have no idea what it is. So you are in a position to be an expert and a teacher, and there are not enough of teachers and experts right now who are confident enough to teach. You don't need to have a degree or to be a researcher to do it. Just teach what you know and spread it in your community, and you'll see beautiful things happening around you.
Amen to that.
Kris, this is really inspiring. I admire your generosity with your emotions and you as a person, and that is spreading around the community. I understand that this is not easy, and we admire you for that. So thank you for taking your time to explain to us and our audience on how you work and what your aspirations are. Hope you all learned something as well from Kris. As always, please subscribe to the podcast, like it, recommend it, and do follow Kris on Twitter. Amazing work. She is our priestess in AI. So thank you, Kris.